Hello and welcome to the Empower Couples podcast, where here you get modern, non-boring relationship advice for you and your partner to communicate like pros, fight smarter, and stay on the same team no matter the challenge that you face. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman.
And I'm Jocelyn Freeman, but you all just know us as the Freemans.
And this episode is all about justifying versus explaining yourself when your partner misunderstands you.
Yes, we actually got this message in our DMs on Instagram right after the episode had published just 2 days ago on sources of defensiveness, what to do when you and your partner are getting
behavior.
Yeah, exactly.
And literally there probably has not been an episode where we got more messages from that episode, which is actually what's driving this episode.
Exactly. And so we wanted to read this question to you because it was so poignant, and we actually posted it on the stories, and many of you were like, I feel the same way, and please cover this. And so we figured we need to. And the question was, what is the difference between justifying and just explaining how you feel like your partner misread your intentions? Sometimes I feel like we're fighting over a version of me that doesn't feel true, and I can't tell if that's just me being defensive.
Now, I gotta say, this is such a good question, and so many other people said, that's how I feel. And when you and I really deliberated on our drive, which, by the way, we just landed in Arizona after our 40-hour drive, and this hit home for so many people coming off the back end of defensive behavior on Tuesday, that we said, we have to land in Arizona, that we drove 40 hours. We're going to get something to eat and do this podcast because this is how important it is. And we will say this is very nuanced, and it has a number of complex dynamics that could go off in different ways, but we're going to get really clear here on this justifying and explaining.
So before we kick in, I just want to make sure it's clear. Like, our bags aren't even unpacked yet. That is how much we love you guys, okay? We're so devoted to you all from this.
And really, by the way, we appreciate that you are listening so intently and messaging us about what resonates with you. And this is how we can make this podcast just so impactful. And we know this is impactful because this comes from all of you listeners. And I want to start here with another ask. Please review this podcast, because this is how it gets seen by more and more people, and all of us can have that kind of impact on many couples just by you taking a few minutes to review. If everyone that's listening reviewed in one day, we'd meet our mark. Help us with that. Just drop a review here.
So let's go into the subtle, and I mean subtle, difference between justifying and explaining. Now, we're going to go into this a little bit, and we don't want you to get in your head, because we're then going to give you some application of what would this look like in a conversation with your partner, okay?
And we're doing this because we did use justifying in the last episode. We weren't even making any differentiation between like explaining yourself or justifying. So it's so interesting that this came up. And so let's give you a really precise but simple definition of justifying.
So justifying is to show or prove to be right or reasonable. And look at those words, right? And this is from the dictionary. So we didn't make up this definition. The dictionary said this. But you can see the charge in that. To prove to be right. There's an energy about that, right? There's a little bit of a force in that definition. And so often in our behavior, when we are justifying, there is that energy of forcing a certain view, forcing an opinion.
Well, what's there is, to me, it feels like defensiveness.
It does.
When I read that, to show or prove to be right, I feel like a defense attorney. And that's what this feels like. So this was really perfect, coming off, again, the back of last episode about defensive behavior. And this probably came up from the person that posted this, feeling this sort of defensiveness, because I have to justify my actions. I have to justify to my partner that's misunderstanding my intent, which is exactly where we're going here. But you can feel how they're so correlated to the energy within you of being defensive. That's why it's such a great question. How do I know if I'm actually being defensive or just trying to explain myself?
And here's the thing. If you are showing up in a conversation with your partner as if you are justifying, which, like you said, has an energy of defensiveness in it, here's the thing. It doesn't matter what your intent was if you don't acknowledge the impact.
This is the theme of the podcast.
We've got to
here.
talk about impact versus intent.
This is the answer.
Yes, intent. Okay, so here you are. Of course, you are trying your best. You have likely a positive intent behind most of the things you do and say. Maybe not always. We have our moments, but for the most part, if you're listening to this podcast, I'm going to assume you have mostly good intentions. And sometimes we can be so attached to that. And I have multiple stories in my life where I was like, no, my intent was this. My intent was this. Here's the thing, though. Your intent is part of it. But an even bigger part of it is that you have an impact. And sometimes those aren't correlated. Mm-hmm. You can have the most positive of intentions and your impact is something completely different.
And this is what you want to justify. This is what you want your partner to get. There's no reason you should be feeling that way. There's no real reason. So you're trying to prove that they see you in the light that they see you, why they're pointing the finger, while they're blaming you, or even why they're overall just upset. You're justifying my intent was positive. Mm-hmm. You're taking this as negative, and that's the stance you're trying to take as I'm trying to prove that I'm warranted here, that I'm right, that you're the one just taking it the wrong way because I'm justifying I have positive intent.
Oh, yeah. And there have been numerous experiences, not only in our own relationship. We'll share an example here in a few minutes, but I just want to even talk about with friendships, with family. We just left a week with family, and there was a certain scenario where I had a positive intention, but the impact was not that. It actually had a quote unquote negative impact on them. And, at first, my ego wants to be like, no, that wasn't my intent. And you need to always know my intent. And I can't believe you misread me. I mean, you're my own brother, for goodness sakes, right? I can't believe that, right? But it doesn't matter as much what my intent was if I can't acknowledge the impact. Mm-hmm. And Aaron, would you talk about that a little bit? Like, what do we mean by impact?
Oh, yeah. Well, let me tell a story, actually, a different one than you probably thought I was going to tell.
I bet you I know which one you're going to tell.
I did probably mention it in our 40-hour car ride. So, all right, let me take you back a couple of years. Jocelyn and I went to a personal development seminar. It was actually in Cancun. I think I've shared this in one other episode, but if you're new, really pay attention here. And for some of you, maybe you don't remember this story. But we were at a 10-day personal development seminar called Being a Leader. And in this room was 258 real leaders from across the world. It's one of those rooms where you sit in there and you think, I'm like literally the least valuable person here.
Aww.
I mean, it goes to show the level of people that were in this room. And, I had done enough work where I didn't believe that story, but I did think that, like, wow, I'm like doing the least amount of stuff, like, of all the people in this room. Okay, so when Jocelyn and I go to seminars in the past, you had said to me, it seems like you ignore me throughout the event. Now, I know you don't have that intent, but I focus on talking to people because I'm extroverted like that. So I set the intent. Notice where we're going here. I set the intent with you beforehand. I was going to let you know often and daily and frequently that I was thinking of you and that I loved you, right? I didn't know how I was going to do that yet. So now we're in like day 3, and it's a place where people get to go to the front of the room and kind of share like what they're taking away. It's where people have like big transformations and sharing. You went up there. You started to walk up there, and I was like so proud you were going up there that I whistled at you to like show my support. Now, later on, after the event closed that day, my group was telling me, I can't believe that the leadership here let someone catcall. This is a leadership event, a high level one, and they just let something go like a catcall. People were pissed. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So I share with my group like, hey, that was me. That was my wife. And I also shared, hey, my intent, I was just showing love and support. And they were like, oh, wow. So they started to notice how they were impacted. So that's where we're at here, right? You asked me the question, intent versus impact. My intent was to show my wife support and love during a public event where before I wasn't showing you that much support. Now, the impact is that people were furious.
And triggered.
Now, what ended up happening was the next morning, I raised my hand and I went to the room and I shared what I'm sharing right now. After that, I said, if anybody else was impacted, I'll be over here in the back. Come talk to me. I'm not kidding you. I had no less than 30 people at that break, as well as throughout the rest of the event, that came up to me and said, well, thank you so much for being so honest about it. And they shared story after story about how furious they were. Some people said, I hadn't been able to even hear what the leader was saying. I've been so angry this whole time. And many of them justified, notice where we're justified in their view, because a number of them were in human trafficking. And they were, this is coming from them, not me. They said they work in Mexico where a whistle is the signal to kidnap somebody. Another lady said she experienced this kind of sort of abuse in her military career the entire time. Someone else came to me and said they were in a business corporate setting where this type of sexual harassment behavior happened all the time as well. So I was getting, for myself, first of all, I had the most positive intent. And look at the impact. Now, luckily, we were in this place where people were in personal development. They were looking at the places where they were giving meaning to things. So I felt kind of lucky that they weren't blaming me. They were sharing with me, but they were taking ownership of that they made this mean X, that it had the impact on them. But this is where we really have to get. We cannot operate in life thinking we will not have a negative impact on people. And that was the biggest takeaway for me. I can have the utmost positive intent, and someone out there is going to take it a different way. It's going to impact them in a different way. And when it comes to a relationship, this is also true.
Yeah, and that story still gets me every time, and I've heard that so many times. I'm sure people are like, whoa, because it's so vivid and so true. Now, that's in a different context, right? But take that same thing that Aaron just shared into your relationship. You know, here you are walking around, and let's say it's a frustration around finances. Let's say it's a frustration around your kids, around your home, around anything. And you are walking around, I have these positive intentions, partner. Don't you know I always have these positive intentions? But like Aaron said, your actions always have an impact. And sometimes the impact on your partner isn't what you intended. And so the point here, what we want to wrap up before we go to in the 4 steps to be able to share and explain yourself so that your partner can receive, here's the thing we want you to get about intent versus impact. If you try to explain your intent on top of not having acknowledged the impact on them, it won't go well.
Oh, that is so well said.
But really, like, that's it. You have to, in other words, acknowledge the impact on them, which I know is not hard sometimes, because you're like,
it is hard.
I can't believe it had that impact. You know, like this last week with my brother, I'm kind of like in my mind, I can't believe it had that impact because I had the most positive intention, right? Like your mind can be so resistant to sometimes the impact when it's not what you were hoping for.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. If you step over that and try to be like, but my intent, it's just going to land on deaf ears.
Yeah. And we deliberated for a while on, are we going to differentiate between justify and explain? And we realized it was going to get confusing. This was the most simplest way to say it. If you're ever really trying to explain, which really can be used as justify.
Yeah, it can.
If you're trying to talk to your partner about, you shouldn't feel that way, or you should have known better. How can you think that of me?
Exactly.
And you're trying to explain that that's not my intent. You're pretty much just in the defensive state, and you're justifying and or explaining. So rather than stay at that level, that's just all the same at this point, because what you're saying it's not going to make any difference until you get to the impact.
Exactly. So we're going to go into that a little bit more here with the 4 steps, because here's the key thing. You want to be able to explain yourself in a way that your partner can receive it.
Yeah.
Which is key, right? Because you can be like beating the drum, explain, but you're doing it in a way that your partner can't receive it. They are resistant. They are feeling not acknowledged, and it's not going well. So the 4 steps. And the first one is you have to first down-regulate emotions. Mm-hmm. And that's both focusing on your own, but also perhaps giving your partner some space to down-regulate there. So if that's a new term for you, Aaron, would you define in just your words, what down-regulate your emotions means?
You get into a heightened state of emotion, your biochemistry, and many people talk about the fight, flight, or freeze. Your brain is getting hijacked by a part called the amygdala. You're not in your logical mind. So your biochemistry kind of takes over and you're just now reacting. Mm-hmm. So down regulating is moving yourself back into an emotional state that's not as reactive. You've heard us talk about being able to respond. Mm-hmm. That's just my version. Down regulate is to move your emotions from a very high peak state in which you're really outside of the logical thinking mind and you're just reacting, and you want to bring those down to a level where you can get back into not ignoring your feelings. You can be with the feelings, but you're back into a conscious place where you can decide how you want to speak and what you want to do next.
So some methods to down-regulate your emotions is going for a walk, taking a bath, doing some breath work, meditating, crying to release it, going and doing a kickboxing class, right? Anything to just take it from where you're unconsciously reacting to in a more calm state so you can consciously respond. So that's the first step, right? And so that's for yourself. Hey, I need to just down-regulate these emotions or else it might not be constructive. Or you know what? It looks like my partner's in a place emotionally where they wouldn't even receive me. So why am I going to try and, talk to them when they're definitely not in the emotional state to hear me?
And talk to them, explain myself.
Yeah, exactly. So then the second step here, once you have focused on down-regulating your emotions, is to then get to the source of your own defensiveness. Mm. And this is really key. And that's why if you haven't listened to the last episode on this, it's critical that you do, and maybe even re-listen to it, to get to the source of defensiveness. Why do we need to do that first? Well, if we don't understand where it's coming from, we can't really ever make lasting change.
Yeah.
Especially because it is something usually deeper rooted, right? Mm-hmm. In the last episode, we talked about it could be fear of not being loved, feeling like there's more negative feedback than positive, feeling as if your partner doesn't really see all the great things you do. Like there's something deeper going on. So it's critical. You must get to the source of your own defensiveness first.
Yeah.
And then, Aaron, what's the third step? We mentioned it already, but I think we need to say it again.
Now you're in a better place to truly listen to them to understand the impact. Mm-hmm. Now, it's difficult, like you said, because it can feel that you're taking on all the blame. And that's not what we're saying here. You get to be in a place where you say to your partner, hey, I know that I did or said this. What was that impact on you?
Exactly.
I'd like to hear from you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then you're just really quiet. Mm-hmm. You're actually listening for what was the emotional impact on them. Mm-hmm. Now, it doesn't matter if it makes sense to you. It doesn't matter that you had a positive intent.
It's so hard.
We're going to get there. But to really make this kind of difference in this area, you really need to get curious about, okay, hey, I know that we're talking about where I spent money, how I disciplined the kids, my decision even on dinner, or even for us, like moving was a big example for us too, right? And that was a place I justified myself because the impact on you was you were feeling out of control. You were feeling unsafe. You didn't have a home. You didn't have your stuff, right? And that was a place that was more difficult for me to be with, that, okay, my actions did cause that level of impact, no matter that I had a positive intent. So I won't go into that story, but you have to, in this stage, really get the impact that's been on them.
I wanted to give another quick brief example for this step 3 before going to 4. And it came from a recent coaching session, and it just came to my mind as a great example for this. So there was this conversation that for them had really built up a lot of emotion, right? From the outside, it might seem somewhat quote unquote simple, but for them, there was a lot of emotional charge. Okay. And just without giving details for them that are private, it was around getting quality time at night. And one partner appeared to be justifying why they go to bed so early. And the other partner was like, but I don't get any quality time with you. Mm-hmm. And then you wake up at 5 a.m. and you go to the gym, and then we don't have any time together. It's all about the gym, work, and kids, right? And so there was this justification. And when there was this moment of connecting finally between them, and they, stopped going into the justifying of like, well, I go to bed so that I can get up, so I can come home, so I can spend time with the kids. Don't you see that? Don't you see that I'm trying to get time with the kids and that's what I'm trying to do? When instead it was like, oh, the impact on you is you don't feel like I desire you. Mm-hmm. You don't feel as if I want quality time with you. That's the impact. Okay, that wasn't my intent, but that's the impact. There was this moment of connection, of intimacy, of finally being ready to receive each other and then get to a better solution. But solution isn't going to really come unless, again, that impact has been acknowledged.
Yeah, and this isn't something you've learned before. We're not saying this is easy to do. We're doing this podcast episode on this because we know you can do this. Mm-hmm. And it is one of the most challenging, but only because of our past patterns around this. We do want to justify. We do want to explain ourselves. So this really takes some practice. So actually, why don't you just share here real quick? We were able to do that with that couple in 1 hour, right? Because of that's what we do. Mm-hmm. And so why don't you talk about just this opportunity to do the assessment and call with us actually, because this can be something that you try and practice over like a couple of weeks or months. You can do more damage. You can be more misunderstood, or you could actually just do this in 1 hour.
Well, in this, we weren't even planning on offering this assessment again because we actually sold them out last month. Like we did it as a special promotion. They were eaten up in just a few minutes, but we received a personal message just a couple days ago saying, I am so sad I missed that discount. So we wanted to offer just 2 spots for this. So just to give you a sense, we have thousands of you guys listen every episode. So if this resonates, you're going to want to message us and we'll tell you how. But basically, we give you the way to take the #1 relationship assessment in the world. It's been around for 40 years. 4 million couples have taken it. And it's an in-depth report into your relationship to give you insight onto, the sources of challenges that are coming up for you. So it finally puts 2 and 2 together and you go, oh, that's why. And it's unbiased. It takes into account both of you. So there's no one right or one wrong. Uh-huh. And then we do a call with you. And we are masters at this assessment. We have helped thousands of couples take it. And we know how to draw correlations and say, hey, this is probably going on because of this. And you go, oh, wow, I never would have seen that before. So normally you can only take that assessment by doing our course that's $1,000 or coaching with us. We are giving 2 spots. Again, we sold these out really fast last month to take the assessment and do the call with us for only $147. Okay, so the way to do that, either text us at 602-321-5652, or you can send us an email at connect@newpowercoupleswithans.com, and those will both be in the show notes for you as well.
That's the 3rd step. So once that happens, and ideally you do that in an hour, not months, right? Mm-hmm. Step 4 is you now are at the place for yourself where you can ask, hey, is now a good time to explain what my intent was?
Mm-hmm. Are you open to receiving it? Are you open to hearing my perspective? Exactly. So the timing is key. So
it's everything.
It is
actually.
everything.
It's 100% everything.
And that's why, again, just to reiterate, right? Step 1, downregulating emotions. Step 2, get to the source of your own defensiveness so you understand where it's coming from. 3, acknowledge the impact on them. So this 4th step is ideally now a better time to do it, okay?
Yeah, and you really have the opportunity. If you think through and actually feel through the steps we're talking about, the big difference here between the explain and the justify is when you're doing that up front, only defensiveness. Not going to go that well. Once you get down here to step 4, now that your partner actually feels understood, seen, and heard, now you get the opportunity to explain. And this is where we wanted to make the difference between justifying and defensiveness and explaining at the top level to actually explaining your intent, because we're not asking you at any time to suppress yourself, to not be your true self, to not be heard and understood.
To feel like you're always having to take one for the team.
Totally, yeah. It just has to be the right time. And so this is the right time. We know you feel in your body the whole time you're listening to your partner, acknowledging the impact, you're still feeling, I need to get this out. I need you to understand my actions. I need you to understand the intent and where this was coming from. But this is the right time. And you still want to ask them because maybe they haven't fully, well, I take that back, because if they really feel acknowledged, not only is their emotion downregulated, but they're actually probably upregulating to the feeling of connection, of understanding.
And receptive, they're more receptive.
Oh, that was the best word you could have said.
Exactly.
They are now receptive, and there's actually a space of love being able to expand in that moment, and they will probably want to hear from you. And you get to deepen this connection. This is one of those areas, if you've been listening to us talk about, well, challenges and conflict are the place for you to deepen your connection. This is it. This is it right here if you go through these steps, because now you get to say, hey, my intent actually was. We actually talk about this in the 5 R's, right? It's kind of similar to sharing what your commitment is to the relationship. Hey, my commitment is that we both feel cooperative, collaborative, we have shared responsibility, and there's love, right? And that's my intent. And then your partner can really hear that you guys are on the same side, and in essence, you kind of disappear the action and the impact because it's already been acknowledged.
Yeah, and if you're like, well, maybe I'm not as good at identifying even what my intent was, maybe you need to take a pause and actually reflect on it, right? So behind everything that you do, there is an intention. Let's say it's something you invested in for the home and your partner is upset about it and they think you're so frivolous, or I can't believe you spent that money, or again, it could be a parenting decision. You go, okay, how can I reflect on what my intention was so that I can share that? Because Aaron, you say this often, and it can't be said enough, is that behind every action, you likely 99% of the time have a positive intention. Yeah. You aren't malicious people. You and your partner isn't as well. They have a positive intention behind something. And a lot of times we don't reflect on it, so then we can't communicate it to our partner. How can your partner understand your intent if you aren't sure what your intent was?
Yeah.
So you got to reflect on that. So just as a brief recap, because we've covered a lot here, right? So the question was very powerful, and many of you might feel as though you're having to, fight over a version of yourself that doesn't feel true. We talked about the subtle difference between justifying and explaining. And remember that justifying is trying to be right. It's trying to show and prove that it was reasonable so that you can be right, but then who's wrong? Your partner. So then
if your partner's wrong and they lose, the relationship loses too.
Exactly.
So your relationship only wins when both of you win.
Yes. So then we talked about intent versus impact. And you can have the most positive of intentions, and it has a completely different impact.
Sorry about it. That's life.
That is life. And what we have to do is say, okay, I understand that I had the positive intentions, but this is the impact, and I need to face this. I have to face the impact. And if I try to step over that, my partner will not likely be receptive to even hearing or understanding my intention. Yeah. Okay. So then we went into the 4 steps to take so that you can explain yourself in a way that your partner can receive you. 1, downregulate emotions. 2, get to the source of your defensiveness. 3, acknowledge the impact on them. And you can ask them if you aren't sure. And then 4, ask if now is a good time to explain your intent. Are you open to hearing my intention? Is now a good time for you? And, to really make sure you are clear on what your intention is and what the positive intention was for your partner.
That's it. So that is what we want you to take away. And now I just needed to add one small acknowledgement, because though this question that was posed to us that really drove this whole episode was just that one statement, there are a couple of layers. There's at least one layer I wanted to acknowledge. There are some opportunities here where you could go through these steps and it's not going to work. Well, why wouldn't this work? Because your partner actually has created a negative belief about you, and they constantly see you through that belief. In personal development, they call that a filter, right? If you think about like sunglasses, let's say you put different color lenses in the sunglasses, well, it's going to color the way in which you see the world. Your partner may have actually created a belief, a filter in which they see you, and the way they interact with you, the actions they see you take are constantly through this filter. And this is probably a smaller percent of you, but I wanted to acknowledge that because that's going to be some deeper work. And we don't have time to go into that, but that might be a scenario for some people. And in which case, you really need a facilitator that's going to be bold and is going to be compassionate enough to quote unquote call them out and challenge them to look at these beliefs. I wanted to acknowledge that because sometimes that's what's needed.
Yeah, and don't feel discouraged if you're like, oh man, I do think my partner has a negative belief about me. That's often been built up from months or years of the impact never being acknowledged on them.
Oh, wow.
Right? And so if there's been perpetual instances where they constantly feel like the impact is never acknowledged here, that creates a belief. And so again, like I think that is a great point about a facilitator. So just to close this out, that's a great opportunity to do the assessment and the call with us. So make sure you check the show notes for the way to text us to take advantage of one of those 2 spots, or email us. They went really fast last time, so they will this time. Make sure to reach out about that. And with this, we really love that you all send questions and say, hey, okay, I listened to this, but what about this? And keep that up. We want to hear from you. As we said in the beginning, we haven't even showered or unpacked from our trip. That's how much we love you guys. That's how much we want to answer your questions. And we know some of you could use more support. And that's why we always offer to talk to us privately, because you can listen to a podcast, but sometimes you need to go deeper. And that's what we're here for. So with that, we love you all, and we can't wait to talk to you on the next episode.